Hi everyone, I'm Sarah Persov, and today I'm here to talk to you about why women in tech is not just about women in tech. Now, a little bit about who I am first. So, you've heard I'm an engineering team lead, but what does that mean? Every company does it differently. Every area of a company can do it differently. I am a mix of tech and people leadership. I prefer the tech, if I'm honest. I'm an engineer, but it's part of the job. But more importantly, I also head up the Women in Tech function. And what that means is that I work both with women inside Dojo and across the industry. And I really spend the time finding out, what are they experiencing? How can we, as an industry, change our culture and help? I also spend a lot of time helping women learn to advocate for themselves, and I go into businesses to talk to CTOs and senior leadership about essentially this talk, but in a much more intimate and detailed way. So the general kind of talk here is going to be, what are women actually experiencing? And I'll explain why this is critical in a moment. Why should you, as both an individual and a business, care? And what can everyone in here do to actually make a difference? Now, this is not a preachy talk. I'm not trying to preach at you. I'm not trying to change who you fundamentally are. What I'm trying to do is bring you on the journey of what women are actually experiencing and why this is contributing to the shocking statistic that 40 to 45% of women who enter the tech industry leave within the first 8 years or by the age of 35. And it's predominantly not due to wanting to raise a family. It is due to the culture. It is due to the things that I'm about to talk about. And that's why it's critical that I actually spend a significant amount of my time talking to women everywhere in the industry, including women who have left. And the big problem here can, in the neatest way you can, which is not that neat, break it up into these bullet points. There has been a normalization of subtle or low-level discrimination. There are shocking double standards. There's the everyone knows lack of representation. There is also a really big issue with the dismissal of expertise and experience. There's a lack of respect, and you have to fight for your career progression. Now, when I first started doing this talk, I would try and break down the different stories I've heard, or I often call it anecdotal data, because I spend my time talking to women. I'm an engineer. I aggregate and anonymize it. And you can't split this up neatly into different boxes. They're all intertwined. So, how many people here know the fact that women will, on average, only apply to a job spec if they meet 80% of the criteria? Men apply, on average, at 30% of the criteria. So from the get-go, there's a bit of an issue there, right? But why? Let's say you had a fantastic experience at university, which, in of itself, I haven't met many women who did comp ski who didn't face any overt sexism. And you're applying to a job. You don't feel confident. But it's your first job, you haven't experienced any sexism yet. No, still have not found a woman who didn't face that, but let's pretend there is. There's this really weird thing that's happened in the industry where women are expected to be superwomen. I often hear, after talks like this, actually, the best members of my team are women. They do everything. They're superstars. They're Wonder Woman. You know, they handle all the meeting notes. They handle, looking after people. They're the ones who notice if someone's upset. They get put into a pastoral care mode. But that isn't taken into account. In an interview, these biases, and they are unconscious bias is still a big thing, is really evident. I have a lot of friends who are recruiters, and time again, they say to me, I've put forward so many women who are more qualified for the role, and the feedback that we get is they're not quite there. Why? What do we need to change about the way we're interviewing people to actually be able to realize that we have this unconscious bias? But let's say you get through that, and you've somehow, been interviewed by somebody who takes you as a holistic person, and it's still your first job. Instantly, you're not treated with the same level of respect as other grads, because there has been, always historically, but recently, a huge uptick in right-wing and incel social media. And what's happening is people are being told that positive discrimination isn't just about ensuring you have a diverse group of candidates to interview. Actually, they're told the only reason that woman got the job is because she's a woman. She's not qualified. And you hear this. I've heard this. I've had so many women come to me and tell me, how am I meant to be confident? How am I meant to prove myself if I'm not even starting at the same line? Often, businesses right now are really pushing for DEI, or diversity, equity, and inclusion. And some businesses are doing this in a way where they're just hiring for the sake of hiring, but they're not training their team on how to have diversity in it. And what has happened time and time again is a series of little things. So, firstly, stand up. If you still do in-person or Zoom to stand up. Something that comes up time and time again is that the way that they are asked questions, there's a different tone of voice. It isn't, oh, you seem to be struggling with this ticket, or, what's going on with this ticket? Why don't I set up a meeting with the PM, make sure you understand the requirements? It's, why haven't you got this ticket done yet? Do I need to set up another meeting? Like, what's happening? Because women are expected to excel without support. And this slowly gets essentially ingrained in the subconscious of the other members of your team. Now, something that I think we all know but we don't think about is that when you first enter an industry or your first job or a new role, you subconsciously mimic those around you, but in particular, you mimic your manager, because that is the best way to fit in, and therefore you have job security. But let's take that a step further, because your manager will have done the same thing, and their manager will have done the same thing. And what this all comes down to is the way that women are subconsciously being treated. So every day in stand-up, there's this tone. You can't call this out. You can't say, why are you talking to me in that way? Because it's subtle. And there's this idea that you're not performing, but nobody can actually say why. Nobody takes into account all the meeting notes, the organizing confluence or notion now, all the other extra little bits that are critical for the success of an engineering team. But let's take it a step further. Who has team socials, either in person or online? Great. How many times have you been in a social where you cannot connect to anybody in your team because they're talking about something that you have no interest in? We're not talking work here, hobbies, social, things like that. You just cannot get in. I've seen a couple of women and men put their hands up. Fab. Let's say this happens every week. The bonding of a team is critical for the success of a team, but also for your own career. Because let's say it's been 6 months, and it's career, trust cycle, whatever you want to call it. You want to go up for a promotion. Your manager is sitting there and thinking, and they know that Jack's wife is pregnant, and she's having a really hard time, and that's why he's really tired, and that's why he's not performing the same amount, because every Friday you guys go and play football together, and then you go for a beer and you bond. He knows that Dave is going through a divorce, and he's really struggling, but he's throwing himself into work. He's missing the bit, he's missing the little bits here and there, but that's because he's overwhelmed, but he's trying so hard. And you know this because every Tuesday on your one-to-one, you go for a walk and you briefly touch on work, but it's really about the support of that person, right? But they don't know anything about Sarah. They know that she shows up. You think that she's okay at her job, but you don't think she's really excelling. She's not a team player yet. She's doing it, but she seems to spend a lot of time doing other things, and you can't really remember because they've never really been validated and acknowledged. And then it's peer reviews. And the reviews that you're getting from the people in your team is that Sarah's not a team player. They trust her maybe a 6 out of 10 to get her job done. Why? They're not really sure. It's just the vibe. They don't remember the specifics because this is all minute stuff. It's microaggressions. It's little things that you don't see until you take a big step back and look at the bigger picture. So you decide to not put Sarah forward for the promotion. It doesn't matter that really she should be a senior by this point. She's been, she's moved role, or it's her first time, she's mid, whatever. She's not getting put forward. It doesn't matter how she actually performs. What matters is how it's acknowledged, how it's identified, and how it's seen. So she gets passed up. She's still expected to be superwoman. It doesn't matter that she spends hours a week helping other people in the team. It doesn't matter that she spends 2 hours a week helping the stakeholder understand the tech. It doesn't matter that she's the reason that you have technical documentation, or that the PM understands the complex API that you guys are building that is really technical and really hard to connect to the product. But, she's learned how to communicate that because that is what is expected of her. She's expected to be able to communicate clearly and in a way that is accessible by anyone and everyone. And if she doesn't know how to speak. It's black and white. So in that situation, what do? You move on. It's a common thing in tech, move every few years. But that confidence, it's not there. That belief in yourself has been eroded. How can you put yourself forward into another unknown situation? You know the mess you're currently in. You know what's happening. You can identify that. You have a women in tech community. You have friends that you talk to and they're like, it's not okay. But you don't quite believe it because everyone around you is telling you that it's, this is how you're treated. You should be thankful that you have a job in the first place, that we actually gave you a chance. That is something I've had over 300 women tell me when they brought up with their manager the way they've been treated, that they were told they should be thankful they were given a chance because in this current economy and with how, women in tech and DEI has been overdone, it's really not to do with, who they are, what they're good at. It's that they've been given a chance. And let's go back to that statistic that you're only going to apply if you satisfy 80% of that criteria. Maybe you're lucky. Maybe you've been given the opportunity to go to conferences like this, like all the other women in tech conferences that happen during working hours and you often have to pay for. And, your manager has been so nice that they've let you take a Wednesday off to go to this little conference. And you get a referral for another job. How much of a job interview is about how you show your confidence? How you can show to people that you know what you're talking about, and that even if you don't know the answer, you know how to get there. But you don't have that in you yet. And this happens again and again. And let's, ignore for a minute the fact that you will be statistically underpaid by this point because you don't have the same confidence to negotiate pay because you should be thankful you've been offered the role. Let's have just a moment to think, what if you are starting a family or have a family? Paternity leave in this country, it's not fantastic. Some companies offer it, but there's still in the entire way our society works, that women are the predominant caregivers for children. That the kid's sick, they're the one taking the day off, not the dad. I've had so many men tell me they are shocked I one day want children because I'm career-driven. Most of these have been men who are fathers, because to them, having children is just, okay, that's what they wanted. It doesn't impact their career. If anything, it makes them look better, because they occasionally here and there will be like, oh, sorry, I need to work from home, my kid's sick. Not, you know, they have to take time off all the time to go to hospital appointments, stuff like that. And you reach a stage where you've built up support, you've built up a community, you've started being honest with your partner about all the things that you're dealing with, and why is it that you come home after every social and you're like, I should feel great, but honestly, I kind of feel like crying. I sat there for an hour and a half, sipped a drink, and had about 5 words. And when I said to them, guys, can we talk about something that I'm also interested in? I was told I should learn about football more. Just to be clear, I get this from more than 40% of the women I speak to, is the football thing. Not to say that women can't be into football, it's just the most common example that comes up. What would you do in this position? How would you feel when you're looking at your child who's growing up and you're trying to teach them to treat people with respect, to treat people fairly, equitably, to teach them with confidence and knowing who they are? And you're hit with the realization that you are not doing this for yourself. You're not advocating for yourself. You are allowing others to tell you who you are. You leave. The tech is fluid, right? Squiggly careers. It's not just writing code. There are so many different parts of it. And this is applicable to not just engineers, it's just those are the majority of the women I've interviewed, and I am an engineer. You leave, right? That is the logical conclusion. You can get a job in another industry, or you can take some time off, regroup, and then decide you just don't have it in you to fight constantly, to be constantly covertly told you're not good enough. Because none of this stuff is overt, none of this is obvious, you know, except for in university where I once got told women can't think code, which apparently still gets said. Also, occasionally people still tell women to smile more. They're not smiley enough, apparently. You're not using enough emojis. You're coming across as rude because you're not engaging in the way that they expect women to engage. And even this, when called out, when I've called this out myself, I was told, this isn't sexism, this is just that you're rude. You know, you're telling people what to do. Well, yes, my job at the time was to tell people to not do certain things so I could fix it. Why should I tell them for the 5th time with a smiley face and 3 exclamation marks and a thank you so much, I really appreciate it, when a male colleague literally copied and pasted what I said and was instantly respected? Now, I'm very much running out of time, but hopefully you can see how all of these bullet points here, all these different things, they're so connected. And I think it's really important to be clear here. The majority of the time, this is not conscious behavior. And it really needs to be acknowledged that, you know, this isn't happening by people who are purposefully, most of the time, going out of their way to have this impact. It's often learned behavior, and it's often behavior that is acceptable in your work culture. Let's see if this works. There we go. So you might be thinking, well, yeah, this isn't great, but I'm a business. I need to make money. I need to have enough money to, you know, pay my employees' salaries. I have investors. Capitalism. there have been so many studies that have proven time and time again, the more diverse your team is, the better product you will make. Apple Health, when they first released it, did not have period tracking. And I know that's an uncomfortable word in a mostly male audience, but they then released it due to backlash. And clearly, either there were no women on the team, they won't, tell us, or the women didn't feel psychologically safe to be open about the product they were making. Because the first iteration of period tracking in Apple Health assumed every woman had the exact same cycle. They could only choose low, medium, high pain. And instead of being able to have custom, tracking things, it was preset things by somebody who'd clearly just gone on Wikipedia. It got taken down in about 12 hours. Think of the amount of time, energy, and money that they would have spent without looking at this from a diverse point of view. Let's think of AI for a minute, as it's on everyone's mind. They've proven time and time again that facial tracking, which uses AI, really only works for white middle-aged men. When I was at university, I, for a friend, did an experiment with them where, and I would say I'm relatively recognizable, bright pink hair, it helps. Apparently, if I took off my glasses and took off my makeup, it couldn't recognize me. Now, let's take into account that our population isn't just middle-aged white men. There are middle-aged men of all ethnicities, as well as women, as well as all ages. It's really important that people understand diversity is critical, especially if you ensure that your team is open and ready and okay with being uncomfortable to hear views they aren't comfortable with, or being told, hey, we're missing a major feature, we're going to have to push this back. It's really important as well to understand that if you don't have an environment that actually is inclusive and is flexible and has that psychological safety, but particularly in the terms of women in tech, women will leave your company. The less women there, like if they joined the company and there are a bunch of women and all the women start leaving, even if they're not talking and they're not being honest and truthful, because often they don't actually identify a lot of these behaviors, by the way, as something that is wrong. They just assume this is how they should be treated. Women will kind of go, well, I should probably leave as well. On the flip side, the more women you have, the more diversity you have, the more that will come. Because people ask, like women ask women. I get messaged every single day asking me about what it's like to be a woman at Dojo, what it's like to be a woman at companies I haven't even worked at, but do I know someone who works there because they want to know and they don't want to join, a culture that isn't safe for them. And ultimately, you want to be a better person. That's kind of a caveat there. Not everyone does, but at least during work hours, in work situations, you want to be a better person so that the talent that you have invested in and spent money on recruiting and spent money on external recruiters and all this don't leave because you're not promoting and supporting them enough. And I'm very much now running out of time. So, it's not all doom and gloom. Things are mostly on a positive trajectory. There's been a little bump because of TikTok and the likes of Andrew Tate telling young men who are very feeling harsh in the current harsh environment that the only reason they're not getting that job is because a woman has taken their place, not because of, I don't know, you're in one of the most competitive industries in the world at the moment. But things are getting better, and there's things that everyone in this room can do, regardless of if you're male or female. And this is a really important part. Just because you are a woman, that doesn't mean you haven't internalized some of this stuff, or that you don't have time to speak to the junior engineers every day. You don't have the capacity to go out and do what I do, which is going and talking to women and finding out what's happening, right? One of the first things that everyone can do is ensure that they have got a women in tech community. And what's really important here is that this should not be free labor. This should not be an extra added thing that women are just expected to find the time to do. This is an actual focal point of understanding that people need support. You need to treat people as people, not cogs. And ensure it's safe. Ask your female colleagues and people who are way below you on that hierarchy what is actually going on, and make it clear that this is safe for them to talk about. They can insult you, they can insult your company, they can be honest and open, and they will not get any retaliation. Because one of the biggest things that stops women talking about this is they get retaliation, and that makes it even harder. If you're already struggling for progression, and you're struggling for a pay rise, you're not going to come out and be honest and go and tell your manager's manager that this person isn't treating me right. They're making these comments. They're isolating me. You know, you have to build evidence. That's hard. But you have to have the courage to know that this could really blow back in your face. So find out what's happening. The other side is that as leaders, you are the people that actually need to start having frequent self-reflection on both your own behaviors, but also the culture of your company. You need to actually be aware of these microaggressions and look out for them. And this is a habit. This isn't something that is like, oh, I'm going to do this once a quarter and things will be magically solved. Like any change, this is something that needs to be purposeful. This is something that you need to actually choose to do. And be aware that things can be uncomfortable, and that isn't a problem. Just because it's uncomfortable, that doesn't mean it's bad, that doesn't mean it's wrong, but more importantly, it can mean that it's the right thing to do, because people are uncomfortable with realizing that they have done something often, and I must emphasize this, not on purpose, that has had an impact in a negative way on another human being. That ultimately, a lot of people, you know, you may really respect that person. Just the way that your respect is coming out is different compared to the way that your respect is coming out for other people. And you need to, especially as leaders, be open about this journey with the management below you. Because in the same way that people mimic their managers bottom up, when you start changing and saying and showing that things need to change, they will start following. And honestly, it doesn't matter if they believe it. And this is something that I get asked a lot. I'm not here trying to change who people are. That would be a miracle. What I'm trying to do is get people to be aware of how they are impacting the people around them in work, work culture, bonding, after-work socials. If they want to go home and be a sexist, racist arsehole, fine, as long as it's not happening in work. And lastly, calling people out. And this is a really tricky one, because calling people out is a perilous thing to do. You have to find the balance. And this is where that uncomfortableness is critical, because please don't do it in front of a room of people. Like if somebody's out of line and they're, targeting a single person, you making a big fuss of it in front of everyone is humiliating. And it singles that person out, and it really isolates them more. The way to do it is take them aside after. Tell them, look, I know you probably didn't mean for this to come across that way, but this is how I interpreted that, and this is how I would have felt if I was being spoken to this way. Let them be defensive, because that means they care. If their response is like, yeah, and, that's a completely different conversation. But let them feel emotion. I often say that one of the greatest feats of man is that they've somehow convinced the world that male anger is not an emotion and female anger is. How many times have people said, oh, she's being overly emotional because she's actually just raised a problem? Women aren't allowed to feel emotion and men are. And we need to move towards a culture where everyone can feel emotion and feel defensive, but have the space to work through it and go on a journey and support them. The flip side to calling people out, though, is that you also need to make sure that the person who is being targeted knows that you saw this. They need to know that it's not okay and that you've actually already taken action because you're not happy with this behavior in your company, in your culture. You know that it's not okay. You know that we need to improve. What support do they need? Maybe you don't have the capacity to support them. Maybe you have a really small startup and there's like 5 of you, right? You don't have enough women to have a women in tech community. That is where you need to ensure that they have the space during work hours to interact with external women in tech communities, to build that support network, and that you are actively encouraging them to do it. It's not like, yeah, okay, fine, I'll let you go to this thing. It's, I want you to go to this thing. You're going to learn. You're going to feel more supported. Because ultimately, when you have people in your team who are happy and feel acknowledged and supported and seen, they're going to be more productive. They're going to work better as a team. You're going to get that product out quicker, and you're going to make money quicker. Now, I've touched on a lot of little things here because of the time, and I've run out of time. If you do have any questions, I believe there's a Slido that after the event they're going to put like in a blog or something I can answer questions. Also, please feel free to talk to me on LinkedIn, in person, on the chat thing on the app. And I think the biggest thing that I can really hope that you take away from this is that there are things happening around you that you will not notice because you've not experienced them, or you haven't experienced them in a really long time and you've kind of forgotten. And that this doesn't ultimately make people bad. Like, it's not black and white. It's all nuanced. And that it's a journey that you have to actually dedicate yourself to. But by dedicating yourself to this, you are going to build better products. You're going to have happier teams. You're going to have healthier cultures, which ultimately will become self-thriving and self-flourishing. Thank you so much.